Beerus is one of the fastest and strongest gods of destruction in the entire multiverse, but when reading over the manga for the 100th time, I started to notice something interesting, and that's that in a one-on-one battle, some of the other gods of destruction may actually possess certain abilities that would allow them to defeat Beerus. In chapters 28 through 29 of the Dragon Ball Super manga, the gods of destruction hold an exhibition match to demonstrate what a tournament of power looks like for the Omni King from future Trunks' erased timeline. When asked by Quitela what the rules for this tournament was, the Grand Priest responded that if any of the gods of destruction refused to give their all during the battle, then those gods of destructions would be erased by Zeno themselves. This is an extremely important detail because it proves that the gods of destruction were most likely using their full powers as well as their strongest techniques throughout the entire Zeno exhibition match. And for the people who will probably say that Beerus wasn't going all out during this tournament, if we look at every interaction that Beerus has had with the Omni Kings throughout Dragon Ball Super, anime or manga, there is zero indication that Beerus would ever be bold enough to defy the Omni Kings, and in fact is literally the exact opposite. Beerus is always terrified of the Omni Kings, and Beerus is willing to do anything to appease Zeno and protect himself from Zeno's wrath, even threatening to erase Goku himself for even trying to befriend the Omni King. So Beerus holding back during this tournament not only contradicts the damage he sustained by the end of the exhibition match, which Beerus would not have sustained if the gap in his power versus the other gods was as large as, say, Super Saiyan 2 Gohan versus Cell or Black Frieza versus Goku and Vegeta, but it also completely contradicts his character and his own personal beliefs that he's been consistently displaying since the very introduction of the Omni Kings. But moving on, during the Zeno exhibition match, it's made clear that the gods of destruction are somewhat relative in strength, which is never explicitly stated but can easily be implied by the fact that the gods of destruction are all depleted and incapacitated around the same time. But each god of destruction during this tournament displays very specific abilities that grant them an advantage over the other gods of destruction during this Zeno exhibition match, and it's these abilities that I think allow some of the other gods of destruction to gain a potential win scenario over Lord Beerus himself. And before this video begins, don't forget to subscribe to see more Dragon Ball what ifs and breakdowns in the future. Let's start with the most confusing god of destruction to scale in the entire manga, which is Universe 11's clown god of destruction, Lord Belmod. Belmod's main feats in the manga consist of trapping 11 other gods of destruction in a barrier and then simultaneously damaging them with his destructive cards technique. This technique is so powerful that even Awan believes that Belmod had the potential to kill multiple gods of destruction in the process. And even Sidra, a god of destruction with barriers strong enough to block a point-blank attack from Beerus, still had no way to defend himself against Belmod's attack. In a recent V-Jump magazine, it stated that Black Frieza has a power that comes close to the gods of destruction, and although it's never stated which god of destruction Black Frieza is coming close to, Belmod's technique is able to damage all of them, so the power of his technique is at least at a level where it could damage and even trap fighters stronger than Black Frieza potentially. To put this into perspective, when Hit used his time cage in the anime to trap Jiren, Hit found this extremely difficult to do because the gap in his power versus Jiren's raw strength, even when heavily suppressed and with Hit having the advantage of controlling time, was just far too massive. However, imagine if Hit not only trapped Jiren, but also Goku, Frieza, Vegeta, and 11 other strong fighters, and then imagine if Hit was still able to create an attack that had the potential to eliminate every fighter in the arena at once. This is almost exactly what Belmod does with his own technique, but with 11 other gods of destruction who serve as the strongest fighters in the entire multiverse, which makes Toppo's statement that Jiren is stronger than Belmod in the manga complete BS, or just flat out incorrect, unless you're planning to argue that Jiren could hold off and injure 11 fighters potentially stronger than Black Frieza during the Tournament of Power, which obviously he can't. can't. While characters like Tien have been able to pull off techniques that are able to stun stronger opponents in the past, there are still a few major differences. For example, looking at Tien's case against Semi-Perfect Cell, nobody during that arc ever believed that Tien was actually going to beat or kill Semi-Perfect Cell. In fact, even Goku and Gohan knew that Tien was going to die if he kept using his technique, and even after this, Tien was so exhausted from holding off an opponent so much stronger than himself that he completely collapsed to the ground afterwards. But in Belmod's case, not only does Awan believe that the attack could actually kill them, and remember, we see that the gods of destruction are relative because they all seem to knock each other out around the same time. So having an attack powerful enough to kill one god of destruction probably means that you have an attack that's powerful enough to kill most of them. And even then, unlike cases like Tien versus Semi-Perfect Cell, Belmod shows zero signs of fatigue by trapping the other 11 gods. And in fact, Belmod actually seems to pull this off quite easily. And finally, Belmod does this with not only one fighter, like most other cases where fighters seal off stronger opponents in Dragon Ball, but Belmod does this with 11 fighters at the same time who are also gods of destruction. For every scenario that you can think of where a character held off a stronger fighter, ask yourself if they would be able to do the same thing if you added 10 other equally strong fighters into the mix. We also don't know if Belmod having to split his energy between trapping and damaging 11 different targets also didn't weaken the strength of his individual barriers and attacks. And if Belmod only had one target, let's say Beerus, then having to concentrate his powers on one god of destruction and his damage output onto one target could hypothetically increase the potency of his attacks after only having to direct his full power into one target instead of dividing his power and focusing it into 11. And since Quitela, Beerus' direct rival in strength, even admitted to being trapped by Belmod's barrier, if that were the case, I do wonder if Beerus would actually be able to escape Belmod's attack if Beerus was the only god of destruction that Belmod had to focus his energy on trapping and damaging. Moving on to the next god of destruction who I think could potentially beat Beerus in a one-on-one battle, we have Universe 10's god of destruction, Lord Rumsshi. Rumsshi has one of the most overpowered techniques in all of Dragon Ball with his extremely broken battle cry technique, which he uses to paralyze every god of destruction in the Supreme Kais during the Zeno exhibition match. Whis explains that Rumshi's battle cry technique has the ability to paralyze the motor nerves of anybody who's able to hear it. And from what we see, only the angels and the Omni Kings are strong enough to withstand this effect. And even Whis goes on to state that the gods of destruction should barely be able to stand after Rumsshi used his technique, making zero exceptions for Lord Beerus. Once stunned, Rumsshi plows through multiple gods of destructions like bowling pins, and this attack is almost like the Dragon Ball equivalent of Madara's infinite Tsukuyomi, being an attack that's completely unavoidable and has no counter for most characters in the universe. Beerus' biggest claim to fame during the Zeno exhibition match was that he was able to dodge 5 other gods of destruction during the beginning of the tournament and also speed blitzed a few other gods shortly after. However, Rumshi's attack is especially effective against Beerus. This is because no matter how fast Beerus actually is, anytime that Rumsshi activates this technique, Beerus will become temporarily unable to move his body, or at the very least significantly slowed down. Meaning that in a one-on-one battle, instead of Rumsshi wasting time and energy attacking multiple gods with his technique, Rumsshi could just activate his technique and land a flurry of attacks on Beerus, which could tip the battle in his favor. In the original manga, Rumsshi and Beerus actually do end up battling, in which Beerus comes out as the victor, but Beerus still clearly sustained a large amount of damage from his encounter with Rumsshi. But if Rumsshi was able to use his battle cry and land a ton of free hits and attacks on Beerus before the battle, I do think that there is a slight chance that this would give Rumsshi enough of an upper hand to overcome Beerus, even if it is just a slight advantage. One thing that remains unclear about Rumshi's technique is how often he can use this attack on his opponents. In the manga, he only uses the technique once, but I do wonder if Rumsshi can adjust the strength of his attack, and if trying to paralyze 11 gods of destruction at once takes more energy than trying to just stun one god of destruction. And again, just like Belmod, there is a chance that Rumsshi would be able to use less energy, only having to stun one god, being Beerus, allowing him to use the technique multiple times in their battle. There's also the possibility that Rumsshi could outright use this technique more than once already, but that he was just written to use it once for obvious reasons. But that would be extremely hypothetical, and we only see him use this attack once in the manga. But regardless, it still has a really big advantage against Universe 7's God of Destruction. But there's still one final God of Destruction who I believe has a fair shot at potentially defeating Beerus in a one-on-one battle, and that God of Destruction is Universe 3's cybernetic monstrosity, Lord Mosco. During the Zeno exhibition match, Mosco was the only God of Destruction fast enough to catch Beerus after he successfully dodged 5 other Gods of Destruction. Some people will attribute this to Mosco sneaking up behind Beerus, but don't forget that Jin and Belmod also tried to land attacks on Beerus from behind and they failed. Even Goku noted that Beerus seemed to have eyes on the back of his head by the way he was moving, and Whis told Goku that Beerus's body could sense attacks and make decisions to dodge them on its own. So it doesn't seem genuine to say that Mosco was only fast enough to catch Beerus because he came from behind, when other Gods of Destruction attempted the same exact thing but weren't fast enough to do it. Mosco further flexes his speed later in the manga by appearing to be fast enough to catch both Liquor and Heelys later on, also further proving that Mosco being able to catch Beerus was not just a one-time fluke, and that Mosco does have the speed to catch a God of Destruction. And it's easy to assume that Mosco's massive cybernetic suit would make dodging his attacks easier than the other gods, but judging by how Mosco is able to catch 3 Gods of Destruction point blank during this exhibition match, with one God of Destruction being Beerus, who is faster than multiple other gods, it becomes clear that not only does Mosco's suit not hinder his speed in the slightest, but being completely fair and unbiased, Mosco could be one of, if not the fastest God of Destruction in the manga purely based on raw feats. Mosco can also take quite the beating. In the beginning of the Zeno exhibition match, after catching Beerus, Mosco tanks the blunt force of 3 bloodlusted Gods of Destruction who are actively trying to eliminate Beerus quickly and before the other gods. Mosco is then subjected to the same card of destruction attack that Belmod used to damage the other 10 Gods of Destruction that Awan even believed could potentially kill them, and yet Mosco still had enough stamina and strength later in the manga to battle both Heelys and Liquor at the same time, while also appearing to be winning the altercation. And if you also didn't notice, 2 of the 3 Gods of Destruction who landed their attacks on Mosco were actually 2 of the last standing Gods of Destruction in the entire Zeno exhibition match, with one being Quitela, Beerus's direct rival in strength, and the other being Rumsshi, who was able to severely damage Beerus while being even more drained and further along in the tournament during that altercation, which still doesn't even include Beerus himself, who Mosco was also focused on restraining at the time, who was also one of the last 3 gods standing. So very technically, Mosco took on the last 3 standing Gods of Destruction at once and still was standing. It's easy to assume that Mosco's durability comes from his cybernetic suit, which is probably most likely the case. However, during the entire Zeno exhibition match, none of the other Gods of Destruction are able to remove Mosco from his suit. So as much as I like to say that all Beerus has to do is remove Mosco from his suit and beat Mule that way, considering the other Gods of Destruction were unable to do this during the original Zeno exhibition match, even when he battled both Heelys and Liquor at the same time, it seems like that convenient win scenario probably is much easier said than done. Another thing that Mosco has going in his favor is his extreme and overwhelming strength. As I said before, Mosco was able to catch Beerus in his grip, and while holding him, even Beerus using the strength of his entire upper and lower body, Beerus is still very clearly struggling to break free from Mosco's hands. In another instance, while battling both Liquor and Heelys, Liquor was also struggling to break free from Mosco's palms, even though Liquor was the only God of Destruction able to break free from Belmod's barrier that trapped the other 11 Gods of Destruction, when even Beerus's rival in strength Quitela admitted to being stuck in Belmod's bubble. So it's safe to say that unless you're one of the stronger Gods of Destruction, if you find yourself in Mosco's grip, it's pretty much game over. Another thing to note is that when Mosco initially caught Beerus, he could could have easily began blasting Beerus with the same eye beam that he used to hit Heelys with, but the only reason that he hesitated was because the other 3 Gods of Destruction were coming in with their own attacks, and Mosco likely didn't want to injure them or stop them in the process. But imagine if Mosco was able to catch Beerus and then proceeded to slam Beerus with his eye beam attack that seemed to gravely injure Heelys, another God of Destruction, at the same time that Beerus struggles to break free. This would probably be extremely exhausting for Beerus, and if he struggled to break free from Mosco's grip before, when Mosco wasn't hitting him with any attacks, then imagine adding a powerful beam that can damage a God of Destruction, constantly raining down on Beerus while his body shakes to break free. Regardless of what you think of the outcome, I don't think that it's fair to say that Mosco's chances of winning against Beerus are anywhere near 0. But now that we're nearing the end of this video, you're probably wondering why I haven't mentioned Quitela as a potential god who could beat Beerus. I do think that it's obvious that in the manga, it sets up Quitela as a rival to Beerus' strength. Considering that Beerus and Quitela are the last 2 standing Gods of Destruction in the exhibition match, and also that Quitela proclaims that he was able to beat Beerus in an arm wrestling match in the past. However, when looking at the bigger picture, I'm not so sure that Quitela has the skill set needed to actually beat Beerus in a one-on-one. During the Zeno exhibition match, Beerus is clearly much faster than Quitela, as Quitela is one of the Gods of Destruction that Beerus dodges and completely speed blitzes. Unlike Rumsshi and Belmod, who have techniques that can specifically nullify Beerus' speed and movements, allowing for openings to land multiple attacks, Quitela displays absolutely nothing that implies he would be able to overcome the speed advantage between himself and Beerus. So Quitela having all the strength in the world means nothing if he can't actually land any attacks, and it's entirely possible that Beerus would just run circles around Quitela, continuously landing attacks until the battle is finished. Also, being able to beat somebody in an arm wrestling match doesn't necessarily equate to them being able to beat somebody in a one-on-one battle. For example, a bodybuilder might be able to beat Floyd Mayweather or Conor McGregor in an arm wrestling match, but in the ring where skills, experience, stamina, and muscle memory plays a much larger role in who would win, a lot of people who can beat professional fighters in an arm wrestling match would get absolutely destroyed in an actual arena. And while we don't know what Quitela's martial arts skills are actually like, since we barely see him actually take down any of the other Gods of Destruction like his similar counterpart Beerus, it can be assumed that based off the principles of skills and techniques being greater than raw strength, there's a good chance that Quitela would not be able to beat Beerus on his own. But as you can see, some of the other Gods of Destruction do have certain abilities and feats that could be extremely useful when defeating Beerus in a one-on-one battle. I don't think that any of the Gods of Destruction would be able to beat Beerus in a one-on-one battle easily, but I do believe that in some cases with Gods of Destruction like Rumsshi, Mosco, and Belmod, they could even the playing field just enough to have a chance at winning against Beerus with their techniques or their speed. Kind of like how Ultra Ego Vegeta might not be able to beat MUI Goku 100% of the time, but if they were to battle more than once, Vegeta would probably win at least some of those scenarios. And I really do think it makes more sense that the Gods of Destruction are equals in raw strength, but that each God of Destruction specializes in a certain technique or metric that will make them slightly harder to beat than the other. But what do you guys think? Do you agree that Belmod and Rumsshi have potentially one of the most broken abilities in all of Dragon Ball Super? And do you also agree with Mosco being the strongest God of Destruction and potentially one of, if not the fastest? Leave your comments down below, and as always, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I appreciate you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.